Well, all I know is I have a really strong feeling that you're probably one of the kids who thought they were cute leaving messages on our phone. How weird. You guys are very weird. You know
Can I
what?
talk
I
to your
have some
son?
things I need to get done, so I'm going to get going.
No.
Bye-bye.
No, no,
Your
no,
son's a
no.
virgin. Kill yourself, Paige.
What does he look like?
I love
Send me a
that.
photo.
If I could offer one suggestion to bullyhunters.org, I would replace it with just an image of a person closing their eyes, because that is pretty much all you need to do to get rid of cyberbullying. So I urge you all to just do this, and then you should be fine.
And one of my friends told me that he was being cyberbullied, and I started laughing, and I said, you know, your PC has a off button, and your phone has a off button, and everything, every single thing that is connected to the internet has an off button.
A popular and pervasive opinion I've seen from a lot of large content creators is that the entirety of cyberbullying is exaggerated and non-important, and people just need to turn off the internet, close their eyes and ears, and get over it because it's always something that's very avoidable. And in many instances, I do agree. I think that sometimes people don't take the steps necessary to protect themselves. Like, for example, I play a ton of League of Legends, and people harass me in-game all the time if I screw up, and all I have to do is mute them, and it's not a problem anymore. So in that instance, I would not call it cyberbullying, and definitely would not call it a major issue because it's something that can be very easily avoided. However, that is not the case in all instances, and I think that's sometimes missed when people talk about this topic as this really simple black and white issue and say that nothing serious or severe can ever happen with cyberbullying online, and that people are just whiny SJWs or just are soft and sensitive, and that anyone who suffers from a quote-unquote serious issue with this just needs to get over it. And in fact, I have some personal experiences with this that would disagree with that notion, particularly about 5 years ago when I had my old YouTube channel, and a group of actual content creators on the site and their associated friends spent basically an entire summer daily calling me, harassing me, throttling my internet, sending me like 50 voicemails a day, calling my parents, as you saw in the previous video, and essentially basically forcing me to close my channel just to get them to leave me alone. And yes, in a sense, I was able to quote-unquote solve the cyberbullying, but in order to do so, our parents had to turn off my fucking voicemail for like 2 weeks because they wouldn't stop fucking calling even though we ignored every single call after like the first two. One of them I showed you in there. And I had to delete my entire YouTube channel, which I worked years on and was very proud of and enjoyed, but that had to go because if it didn't, then they weren't going to leave me alone, and I knew that. I had to block contact with pretty much every single person I knew from that period, so that way I wouldn't have connections to hurt me in that regard. And I also just had to accept that, yeah, my internet's going to get shit on for a long time while they're DDoSing me, because back then there was the Skype exploit, which gave people your IP. And I just had to accept that a bunch of shit was going to get delivered to our house, like pizzas and chicken and all this dumb bullshit, and call every local company to tell them to stop delivering to us without payment confirmation. So, in a sense, I was able to get over it, but it took massive personal sacrifice, and it wasn't this type of thing where I could have just done something else to ignore it. Unless there's something else I could have done to make the harassment stop, I don't know what else there could have been, because if I ignored them, it was still going to happen constantly, and yeah, I guess I could just quote-unquote not give a shit, but having people call your house 50 times a day, having people spam dislike like 50 plus times every video you make, having people try their best to spend their days to make your life a living hell, that's not something that can easily be figured out with a simple, easy solution. And I think that is sometimes the thing that people miss. Because yes, I would not agree that the idea of somebody being a dick in game constitutes massive harassment and, you know, imperative intervention. I think there are very simple ways to solve that type of thing. But at the same time, that's not always how it goes. I think in general, sometimes once you start to form closer bonds with people you meet online and form friendships in that regard, that's when people get enough information about you and enough contact with you to make the harassment something that might not just go away instantly, especially if they obtain personal information or something they can use against you. And yes, obviously online safety, you could say, plays a role, but at the same time, I don't really know many people who would say that you should just never try to make friends online, that anyone you ever meet online is always going to, be out to get you. I've made a lot of good friends online and people that I care about. So the way I see it is that unless you just refuse to meet people online altogether, which you could say is a valid perspective, you're possibly exposing yourself to the risk of this happening. And obviously, the older you are, probably the better your social skills are, the better your judgment and maturity is, the less likely this is to happen. But for example, when I was a 14-year-old, I was very insecure. It was very obvious. I made myself an easy target because of my personality at the time, and because I was emotional and expressive, and people could tell that messing around with me and fucking with me would get under my skin. And it was very hard for me to not have that happen. It was essentially the same thing as somebody targeting someone to bully in person, where because I didn't make myself a very difficult target, I was pounced on because I seemed weak. And so, honestly, I think that in many instances, this can happen. I have known of it happening to other people to similar degrees as me. I have many friends who've been swatted. I have friends who have gone through the same experience I've had, but a little bit less. I've heard of others that have had the same experience I've had, but it was even worse. And altogether, this type of shit, I think, is very serious, and I think it should be addressed. I don't think saying that cyberbullying itself is a joke is the right response. I think that instead, what should be talked about is what can be done to help those in the serious issue, and also educate people on how to avoid this type of stuff happening. So, for example, I think it's very important to tell, 13, 14, even younger kids, maybe even a bit older, that if you give people personal information online, they can use it against you. I don't know if that's common knowledge enough with people where you start trusting them enough to really know that, yeah, if you give out anything about yourself, they might be able to track you down and do some damage to you. So, giving someone your address if they manage to obtain your IP, that is a big deal. That's not just this, no big deal willy-nilly type thing. A lot of dangerous stuff can happen if you run into the wrong crowd with that information available to them. And at the same time, I don't know if it's always talked about enough, the types in which cyberbullying actually happens. Because from my experience, what I've seen is that cyberbullying isn't you meet some person in your random League game or your Call of Duty game, and that person is a dick to you. That's not what I think should be talked about. I think what should be focused on is situations where either people you know in person use an online platform to get to you, or people you exclusively met online harass you far beyond the scope of what is reasonable and something that you can get away from by doing a few things that aren't invasive. Because I lost my whole YouTube channel because I couldn't face the harassment. That doesn't mean that you could say it was my fault because of the way I acted. Honestly, I don't necessarily agree. I think that is putting a lot of blame on a 14-year-old who is mentally ill. But if you want to make the argument that it was my fault, the way that I acted, that this happened, you could. But even so, based on that, the way that I had to overcome what happened wasn't as simple as just blocking those people. I didn't have any of those people on my friends lists, on my Skype or Discord or, any type of messaging form. I was not in direct contact with any of them. I blocked their comments and their YouTube profiles. The only way they were contacting me was by invading my home privacy. And this is not just a victim thing for me. I'm not the only one that this happens to, I guess is my point. This is not meant to be a video where you feel sorry for me. It's meant to be a video where this kind of edgy new perspective that cyberbullying's a joke and that it's just a bunch of overly zealous liberals pushing an agenda, that's not always true. And I think it's something that should be talked about more explicitly, because you also see in some videos, like in the recent H3H3 video, that sometimes what people focus on in cyberbullying isn't the most dangerous parts that really need attention. And at the same time, Ethan's opinion that he said in that video that cyberbullying can be solved by closing your eyes, I also don't agree with that. So, and obviously, I think it's a nuanced topic. I don't think there's always easy answers, but I think that this is something that, just based on my own personal experience, both with myself and the people I know, deserves to be talked about in a different light than it currently is by both those against it and those who don't believe it exists. So, that's all I wanted to say. Thanks for watching. I probably rambled a little bit, but I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.